Nearly 2 million years ago, on an open stretch of African savanna, a small, upright figure is dragging a slab of meat away from a carcass, fat. Behind them, a pack of hyenas is already closing the distance, drawn by the same smell that drew the hominin there in the first place. There's no bag, no knife in a sheath, no safe place nearby. Just meat, muscle, and a very narrow window of time before the animals that actually rule this landscape decide they want it back. Killing or finding the food, it turns out, was never the hard part. Keeping it was. Here's a question almost nobody asks. Once ancient humans actually got food, how on earth did they hold on to it? No locks, no refrigerators, no pantries with doors, and an entire ecosystem of hyenas, wolves, bears, birds, rodents, and insects that were every bit as hungry as they were, and often better equipped to take it by force. Most people picture ancient humans as simply the hunters. Archaeology tells a very different story, one where getting food was often the easy part, and defending it was the real, constant, unglamorous battle that shaped an enormous amount of early human behavior and technology. Let's start at the very beginning of this fight, because it may be older than our own species. At some of the oldest known butchery sites, researchers examine ancient bones under magnification and look for something specific: the order in which marks were made. Stone tool cut marks and carnivore tooth marks look different, and when one overlaps the other, scientists can tell who got there first. At some sites, the pattern suggests early hominins were scavenging carcasses that carnivores had already partly consumed. At others, it looks the opposite way: humans butchering first, carnivores moving in afterward for the leftovers. The honest answer is that both happened, depending on the moment, the place, and the opportunity. But either way, the second a hominin had meat in hand, they immediately owed a debt to every predator on the savanna that also wanted it, and they were not physically in a position to win that argument by force. So how do you protect food when you can't outmuscle a hyena? You change the terrain of the fight entirely. Fire changes everything. Large carnivores have a strong, well-documented instinctive aversion to open flame. And once humans had reliable, controlled fire, sites at places like Kesem Cave in Israel, dated to over 400,000 years ago, start showing something telling. Hearths placed centrally, with food processing and sleeping areas clustered tightly around them. That's not just about cooking. A fire at the center of camp is also a perimeter. It's the ancient equivalent of a security light, except this one also keeps you warm and cooks your dinner while it works. But fire only protects what's near it. What about everything else? Across hunter-gatherer cultures studied by anthropologists worldwide, separated by oceans, language, and thousands of years, the same basic solution keeps showing up: get the food off the ground. Meat hung from tree branches, racks built above the reach of a wolf or a bear. Here's the honest catch: a wooden rack from 40,000 years ago doesn't survive to be excavated. So this part of the story leans more heavily on comparison with living traditions than on direct fossil proof. But at several Upper Paleolithic camps, archaeologists have found exactly the kind of ash, charcoal, and post holes you'd expect near a drying and smoking rack, physical traces of the structure even without the wood itself. If you can't put it up, you put it down. Literally underground. Storage pits, some lined with clay, bark, or stone, start appearing in the archaeological record, identified by something surprisingly subtle: a change in soil color and chemistry where the pit itself once was, even long after its contents disappeared. There's a clever logic hiding in this. Cold ground below the frost line acts as a natural refrigerator. And burying food doesn't just slow decay, it very likely also hides the smell from anything patrolling the surface with a much better nose than we have. We can't directly prove ancient humans were thinking specifically, "This will fool a scavenger's sense of smell," but the strategy works exactly like it would if they were. Here's a twist: sometimes the best way to protect food wasn't a wall or a hiding spot at all. It was changing the food itself. Isotope and residue studies confirm ancient populations were drying, smoking, and salting food long before written history. And preserved meat isn't just longer lasting, it's often far less immediately tempting to a scavenger than fresh, blood-scented meat straight off a carcass. In other words, sometimes the best defense wasn't fighting off a predator. It was making your food boring enough that nothing wanted to fight you for it in the first place. Now here's where the story takes its strangest turn, because eventually, humans stopped fighting one particular predator and hired it instead. Genetic evidence places the split between wolves and domestic dogs somewhere between roughly 40 and 15,000 years ago. One leading idea is that wolves tolerant of human proximity started hanging around camps for scraps and refuse, and in exchange, their presence, noise, and alertness likely made it a lot harder for other predators to sneak in unnoticed. We can't prove that specific guarding benefit was the deciding factor early on. It's a reasonable hypothesis, not a certainty. But by later prehistory, the pattern is much clearer. Dogs living alongside humans, guarding camps and food stores in a partnership that arguably reshaped both species. And then there's a discovery that quietly rewrites the whole timeline of human civilization. At a site called Dura in the Jordan Valley, archaeologists found the remains of raised, ventilated storage buildings dated to roughly 11,000 years ago. Raised floors to keep rodents and damp ground away. Internal divisions consistent with organized bulk storage. Here's the part that should genuinely surprise you. This dates to right around, or possibly even just before, the actual beginning of full-scale agriculture. Which means organized granary architecture, buildings specifically engineered to protect food from animals, may not be a product of farming civilization. It may be one of the things that helped make farming civilization possible in the first place. It's tempting to think of protecting your food as a small, boring logistical detail underneath the real story of human history. The evidence suggests the opposite. The fight to keep food safe, from hyenas, from wolves, from rot, from rodents, pushed early humans toward fire management, cooperative camp design, preservation chemistry, animal partnership, and eventually architecture built with a single defensive purpose: keep this safe until we need it. That's not a footnote to civilization. In a very real sense, it's one of its foundations. Next time you close your refrigerator door without thinking twice about it, remember that you're performing the latest version of a problem your ancestors were solving for nearly 2 million years. Fire that kept predators back, racks that lifted meat out of reach, pits that hid it underground, a wolf that became a partner instead of a rival, and eventually, buildings raised specifically to keep hungry animals out. Your kitchen is the newest chapter in a very, very old war over dinner.